Welcome back to Nocturnity, my friends. Tonight we have 3 horrifying Facebook Marketplace experiences lined up that will be sure to traumatize you enough to have you trusting no one online and sticking to name brand outlets for the next while. But before we get into them, take these 5 seconds to hit that like button to help our young channel grow, and that subscribe button to be made aware of our newest releases as soon as they drop. And now that that's out of the way, get comfortable, because we're about to take a bumpy ride into the dark recesses of the realm of eternal night. Two weeks after I signed a contract to pay off a new phone for 2 years, I did what we all fear the most in that situation, and dropped it on the concrete, spiderwebbing the front glass to the point that it was unusable. I of course cheaped out when I bought it, and said no to the warranty. So essentially I was screwed. But a glimmer of light found its way into the situation when my sister suggested checking Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace to see if there were any used phones I could afford on them. And my day brightened even more when I found the same phone that I had, just an earlier model, for only $150. So I messaged the user and arranged to meet him that night, halfway between our cities. I went alone, not thinking much of it, but in hindsight, which is always 20/20, realized I should have brought at least one person with me. Because the seller pulled up to the park we agreed to meet at with 3 other guys in his car. And upon one look at them, and the tattoos all over their necks, you could tell they were dangerous individuals. Rap music was booming out of the windows, accompanied by marijuana smoke when they pulled into the parking lot. And my first thought was that I was going to get jumped for being on gang territory or something, so I immediately thought of just hopping back in my car and taking off. But then I figured, based on the time and place, that this was probably who I was there to buy the phone off, so despite my fears, and what I'd now argue as my better judgment, I stood my ground, telling myself to not be such a suburban wimp. I took a deep breath as they pulled right up beside me. "You Eric?" the driver asked me over the loudest Boosie track ever played. "Yeah," I answered, trying my best to appear as cool as a cucumber. He turned down the music a little bit and asked if I had the money, and I told him I did, wondering if that was the key word to me getting stomped down right there in the parking lot. Instead, he reached into his center console and then handed me the phone out the window. I took it and looked at it, surprised at the condition. It was like new, with a full battery. I wondered if it was stolen, but really didn't give a shit either way if I'm being honest. Reaching in my pocket, I then asked, "$150?" to double-check the price. "Yeah," he confirmed. As it turned out, I'd actually left the money in my glove box, but my broken phone was in my pocket, so I pulled it out and popped out the SIM card while I said, "The money's in my glove compartment." I put my old phone on the roof and went to open the slot for the SIM card in his phone, but it was different than mine. This phone was for a different provider, so I told him as much as I handed it back to him. This pissed him off, and he refused to take it. "That's your phone now," he told me. "Give me my money, man." Everyone in his car was now eyeing me closely, which made me as nervous as ever, but I wasn't about to pay for a phone that I couldn't use. That was the last of my cash for 2 weeks. So I tried explaining it to him, showing him my SIM card wouldn't fit in that phone. "I don't care, man," he said back. "I drove out here to sell you that phone. Now give me my fucking money. I'm not going to tell you again." That was no doubt both a threat and a promise. But I wasn't going to give him my money for what was a useless piece of plastic to me. "I'm sorry, man," I said back, holding the phone out to him. "I don't want to buy it if I can't use it." Every door opened on that car at once. I stepped back as they all stepped out and surrounded me. The one who handed me the phone was huge, but he was the smallest among them. I'd never been in a fight in my whole life, so the fear running through my veins at that moment was enough to make me dizzy. They enclosed me with my back against my own passenger door. The one I'd been talking to got right up in my face and said, "Give me the phone." With a shaky hand, I gave it back to him. Without taking his eyes off me, he threw it down to the pavement and it smashed into little pieces. Then all of a sudden, Two of the others grabbed onto my shoulders and dragged me over to the fence in front of our cars, pinning me up against it. I was preparing myself to start getting beaten, maybe even to death. But they just held me there for the time being, while the driver opened my passenger door and ducked inside, coming back out a second later with the money from my glove box in his hand. He then walked up to me while my hands remained pinned against the fence and held the money between his thumb and index finger, waving it right under my nose. "Should have just given me the cash for the phone, compadre. Now you don't have either." After he said that, he quickly balled up a fist and swung it at my face as fast as a professional fighter, stopping it just before he made contact, making me flinch so hard that I fell to the ground, realizing then that they'd just let go of me. And as I lay there, demoralized, robbed, and terror-struck, they all casually got back into their car, started it up, and drove off with the music once again going full blast. Again, with hindsight being 20/20, maybe they were right. Maybe I should have just taken the phone. Imagine my dismay when I was watching the 49ers and the picture on my television suddenly disappeared with a loud zap. It was fried, with no chance of resuscitation. So I was forced to throw it away, and since, sadly, my life revolves around television when I'm at home, I needed a new one pronto. One look online at the prices of new TVs had me trying to figure out a plan B. That's when my girlfriend told me to check out Facebook Marketplace. I'd never clicked that tab, and holy smokes was I impressed when I did. There were a veritable ton of used televisions in my price range, from top-name brands to boot. So I sent out messages to a whole bunch of listings, hoping at least one would get back to me, and was once again impressed to have gotten a response from the majority of them pretty quickly. So I rescanned all the listings who'd answered, and I picked what I thought was the best deal. A 70-inch LED Panasonic that was only slightly used and advertised as like new for $500. The seller had a high rating with a bunch of great reviews, so I asked where he wanted to meet. He gave me an address on the edge of town, telling me he had the TV in a warehouse where he worked, and said he'd meet me there at 7:30 that night. Whatever, I thought. For that deal, I'd drive a bit out of my way, and told him that I'd be there. When I pulled up, alarm bells started going off in my head. This was no functioning warehouse. This place was abandoned. It looked shady as hell. But still, I parked my car in the empty lot right in front of the front doors and sat there waiting for the seller to pull up. Instead, the front door of the building opened and a somewhat greasy-looking guy poked his head out. Seeing my window was open, he called out, "You Ben?" "Yeah," I answered. "Come on in," he beckoned. "The TV's in here. You can test it out." My internal alarm bells got a little louder at that point, but I did my best to block them out. After all, I needed a TV, and this was going to be the best one I'd ever owned. Besides, I told myself, despite the look of the building and the guy, he sounded nice enough, and I'd be a fool to just take off. He'd probably think I was a complete pussy if I did. So, I said screw it and undid my belt, opened the door, and walked up to the building. But when I got up to him, I couldn't help but to stop short, seeing that there were no lights on behind him, and seeing up close that he was even greasier than I first thought. He had dirty, slicked back, black hair, a bunch of metal teeth throughout his sketchy smile, and tattoos all over his arms. "Come on," he encouraged me with that painted smile, still holding the door open with his side. "It's right in here." "Looks pretty dark in there," I said nervously. He looked back for a sec. "Yeah, we just bought the place, still doing renos, but it'll be up and running at the end of the fall. But it's safe, don't worry." I took a deep breath, and against my better judgment, slipped past him into the dark entrance. I heard the door shut behind me, and jumped a little as the hard metal lock clicked in place. "This way," he then said as he pressed past me into a dark hallway, his cheap cologne almost choking me. I apprehensively followed him, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the bare walls, and seeming more apparent than I guess they should have been. Looking back, I guess my fight-or-flight response was up and running, He then pushed another door open and went into a small room that was once an office. Inside was a hanging light, the type you hook onto your hood when you're working on your car at night. I stupidly followed him in and let the door close behind me. He then turned to me and his face now looked deranged. All the friendliness had escaped him, and he asked me directly, "You got the money?" Now completely off kilter and quaking from fear, I did my best to swallow my nerves and answered, "Yes, but where's the TV?" At that point, he reached into his pants and pulled out a butterfly knife and opened it like only someone who has experience with one could, and said, "There is no TV, you dumb shit. Now give me the money." Despite what you may think of all the decisions I made up to that point, I'm not an idiot, so I did exactly as he told me and handed him over the stack of bills from my pocket, not taking my eyes off the sheen of that blade through the whole transaction. "Now the wallet," he ordered, after pocketing the cash. I reached for it, but told him that I just gave him all the money I had, so he wouldn't be mad when he saw that the wallet was empty and start cutting me up. An outcome I was pretty sure was going to happen no matter what anyways. Opening up my wallet and sliding my ID out in the same motion, he then threw the wallet to the ground and looked at me with an even meaner expression than before and held it up to me. "You call the cops and I come to this address, you understand?" I nodded and stuttered, Yes, sir." After an inquisitive look into my eyes for a few moments, he then ordered me into the far corner of the room and told me to face it and not to move. I feared the worst. Perhaps he didn't believe me and decided to just eliminate me to be safe. My eyes began to tear up as I prepared to feel the blade enter my back or slit my throat. But all that happened was the light around me began to shift as I heard the door open. "Count to 500, I heard him bark, "and then you can leave." With that, the door shut and all the light disappeared. By the time I got home, that Facebook account was deleted. I didn't risk calling the cops, and through that awful experience, easily the scariest thing I've ever gone through, I learned a valuable lesson. If you're buying something off Marketplace, be cautious and always bring someone with you. Me and my girlfriends began a competition a few years ago to see who could make the most profit within 1 year on Facebook Marketplace. The rules were simple. The four of us all had to start with the same item, so we all went out and bought the same pincushion from a sewing store nearby, and the idea was for each of us to sell our pincushions on Marketplace for whatever we each thought we could get for it, so long as it made a profit from what we paid, and then use that money to buy another, more expensive item, whatever we individually chose at that point, and then sell that for a profit, and so on and so on. And then after a year of continuing to buy and sell increasingly more expensive items, we'd compare who made the most profit, and the winner would get half of everyone else's earnings. The only catch was, we had to show all of our transaction history to prove we didn't put any extra money in to bulk up the items unfairly. Only money earned through our sales could be used. Anyways, 6 months in, and I was neck and neck for the lead with my friend Laura. From beginning with a $3 pincushion, I'd just sold a $450 mountain bike, while Laura was still working on selling a $450 laptop. So I was in a position to take a big lead if I can find an item at a price that I could really put an increase on. Just getting into summer, I found that a hot item at the time was barbecues. So I researched them and began to look for a good one in good condition that was generally selling for around $500, that I could grab for $450 or less, and was completely blown away to see a KitchenAid 5 in great condition being sold for $400. I had to triple check that price because those things were selling for between $950 and $1,100 on Marketplace. I don't need to tell you that this would put me in a massive lead, so I was extremely excited. But, as they say, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. So I did my best not to get my hopes up too high and messaged the seller with the expectation of a reply that the price was a misprint. Honestly, I wouldn't be too surprised to see someone trying to sell one for $1,400. But it was no misprint. The seller explained that he'd just bought the barbecue a couple months back and hadn't even used it, and was selling it for so little because he was moving across the country for a job opportunity and couldn't bring it with him. He said that I'd actually be doing him a big favor by buying it, because he'd dropped the price numerous times with no offers, and if he couldn't get rid of it right away, he'd have to leave it behind, telling me the money, though a loss from what he paid, would really help him out with the cost of the move. I couldn't believe my luck. In my mind, I was already calculating the lead I'd have over the other girls before I even arranged to pick it up. I could easily sell it for $900 and make a $500 profit on one sale, so I wasted no time in arranging a time and place I could pick it up. The seller, whose name was Bill, told me I could come by when he got home from work at around 8:30 and gave me his address. Before answering, I called my brother and told him, because he always accompanied me when I bought or sold anything for safety reasons. But unfortunately, he had to work a double shift. Even worse, when I asked if I could come the next day, Bill told me he wouldn't be around for a few days, and to make matters that much more worse, he now had another buyer messaging him that had offered him more money for the barbecue. But, he said, since I spoke with you first, if you can get here tonight, you can have it for the price we agreed upon. If not, I'm going to have to sell it to this other person. He even sent me a screenshot of their conversation. With profit on my mind, and knowing I wouldn't find another deal like this anytime soon, if ever again, I risked sailing too close to the wind and decided to go by myself, messaging that I'd be there at 8:30 sharp with the money. By 8:30 that night, I was turning my van into the parking lot of his building. There, standing on the walkway up to the front door, was a man I thought must have been Bill. Pulling up to the curb, I opened the passenger window as he bent down to look in before saying my name in a questioning tone. After I confirmed it was me, he pointed at the slope down to the parking lot under the building and said, "The barbecue's in the underground. I didn't want to even try to wheel it up the ramp. I'll take you down. Mind if I hop in?" He looked like a really nice guy, clean cut, well-dressed, smiley, and charismatic in his tone and demeanor, so I said sure and unlocked the door with the power lock button. He hopped in and we started towards the ramp. No, he advised, prompting me to hit the brakes. My parking spot's only accessible through the back entrance. Oh, I said. Okay, how do we get to that one? He looked out the rear window over his shoulder. You gotta go back out to the road and then hang a right down the next street. Then the next right after that will lead us right to the ramp down. This kind of threw me for a loop, so I guess I hesitated, because he quickly reassured me in his trusting, friendly tone, "It'll just take a minute, you'll see." So I turned around and headed out to the road. He then turned his head again and looked into the back of the van. "Great idea taking the seats out." "Yeah," I replied. I knew I had to make room. Still looking back, he then said, "There's enough room for us to lay down back there." I literally didn't think I heard him right, so I asked, "I'm sorry, what was that?" as I turned my head to face him. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. I'd never seen a taser before in real life, but knew upon first glance that that was what he had in his hand. "Just keep driving at a steady pace under the limit," he said calmly. "This thing is charged enough to kill you, and I won't hesitate to use it while you're behind the wheel." As he said it, he put his other hand on the emergency brake lever between us, showing me he had the power to stop the van whenever he chose. I couldn't believe this was happening. My mind slipped away into a primal survivalist setting, where I just kept driving without really consciously doing it. It was like my mind was in such a state of shock that my body just became a mechanical entity, working the pedals in the wheel as he directed me out of the city and down a country road that I'd never ventured to on my own. The initial shock began to wear off by then, and I finally found the courage to ask where we were going. "You'll find out in time," he answered coldly. The whole drive he kept looking at the road for only a few moments before looking back at me, all of me, from head to toe and then back up again. I could feel that stare. It felt like a physical violation. Though I knew that, based on the way he was looking at me, it would be nothing compared to what he had in store for me whenever we got to wherever he was leading us to. "You're so much prettier than in your pictures on Facebook," I remember him saying, basically through salivation. A cold shiver found its way through my body and soul. But those cold thoughts were interrupted as at that moment a car came out of nowhere, flying through a stop sign right out in front of us, and I was forced to jam hard on the brakes. But it wasn't enough, and my van nicked the car's back bumper and sent it into a bit of a spin. And in the melee, I couldn't help but to notice that the taser had flown to the floor in front of Bill. Neither did he. We then made eye contact for a brief moment, communicating clearly without needing to speak, before he made a move and grabbed it. In the meantime, the driver of the car I'd grazed, an older man with gray hair only around the fringes of his head, was getting out of his vehicle and yelling his bald head off, demanding to know just what the hell I thought I was doing, repeating over and over that I could have killed him. It was then I realized that I'd gone through a stop sign at a four-way stop. In my terrorized state, I guess it was easy to miss. As he approached my window and shouted, my instinct told me to open it and apologize, but the psychopath next to me had different plans. Below the line of the window, he pressed a button on the taser and a charge flew between the two prongs on the top of it. "Step on the fucking gas now," he growled through his teeth at me. I looked back at the man, who was now right next to the window. "Now!" he shouted as he raised the taser towards my neck. In a panic, I did as he said and nailed the gas, peeling out for a second and scaring the shit out of the old man beside the van before taking off down the road, regretting the decision as I made it. But what else was I supposed to do? "Where the hell do you think you're going?" the man screamed as we fled the scene. Moments later, going as fast as the van had ever gone, I saw in my rear view that he was following us in the distance. "Keep your speed up," the lunatic beside me demanded as his attention went back and forth from the back and front windows. "There's a turn coming up in a couple miles. When you see it, take a hard right." In the few glances that I took at him, I could see the gears trying to turn, but malfunctioning in his mind. He hadn't banked on any of this happening. "I should kill you both," he chastised me out of frustration, sweat now dripping down from his brow, and his hand still over the e-brake. I'd already figured out that his only option was to tase me, pull the brake, and then tase the old man while I was either dead or temporarily paralyzed from the electric shock. If he hadn't concluded the same thing yet, it was only a matter of time until he would. Or at least, that's where my racing mind was at that moment. And things only got worse when from far behind the old man's car, flashing blue and red lights appeared in my rear view. The police were now on their way. That oddly gave me hope and absolute dread simultaneously. Bill began to scream obscenities at me from the passenger seat, and by the tone in his voice, I knew that the tase was coming at any second. So, in desperation, knowing what my fate would be if I didn't try something, anything, to get out of this situation, I made a snap decision and did what I thought was my only option, jamming on my brakes, hoping that just like earlier, he'd drop his weapon. This time, though, he held onto it tight as his body flung forward into the dash. Still, though, I saw an opportunity and wasted no time in hitting the power locks button and opening the door. But, to my utter horror, I unfortunately didn't have the chance to undo my seatbelt before I felt a surge of electric current entering through my neck and vibrating through my entire body. He must have held it there for only a few seconds, but I swear to you that up to that point, it was the worst pain that I'd ever felt, much more dreadful than I ever could have imagined it being. I was completely incapacitated, stiff as a board, internally in excruciating agony, expecting a full-fledged violent thrashing to follow. But the next thing I knew, I was being heaved from my seat out onto the road and watching my van take off while bracing for the car upcoming to run me over. I heard the brakes hiss and the tires squeal behind me, but the hit thankfully never came. The old man got out of his car and ran over to me, while the police car swerved around us and kept in pursuit of my van. The old man was yelling, but I had no idea in my state what was being said. But eventually I realized he was doing what he could to help me. Then, after about 3 or 4 minutes, I'd say, still in abysmal pain, my muscles began to loosen up, and I was able to move again, just as the paramedics arrived on the scene to treat me. Luckily, the taser wasn't enough to kill me. as I'd been told when first threatened with it. It just left me with a scar and a bad memory. Worse off was my hip, which was fractured when I hit the ground after being hurled from my van. As for the lunatic behind all of this horrendous chaos, he didn't get far before running over a spike strip in the road and veering off into a ditch, totaling my vehicle, and himself. His injuries would heal inside of a prison hospital. I would learn who he was and what he was actually up to through his court case, which I attended every session of. Unsurprisingly, that wasn't his building I'd met him at. He actually lived in a mansion with a wife and 2 kids. He was the CEO of a very successful firm, and according to a journal he kept in a safe in his office at work, he'd had an urge to get away with murder since he was a child, and recently it had come back to the forefront in his mind. And so he put up the ad on Marketplace on a dummy account, at first intending to kill whoever answered, man or woman, even expecting a man, but soon reasoned in his sick mind that only a woman would do when my message hit his inbox. That prompted him to up the ante, and he decided to add sexual thrills to his psychotic docket, to bring me out to a place in the country where he could first violate me against my will and then kill me with his bare hands. When asked what he would have done if I would have shown up with a man accompanying me, his answer was a cold and honest, "I would have killed them both," drawing gasps from all those in the courtroom, including his heartbroken family and disappointed high-priced lawyers. I can't even begin to put into words the trauma the whole episode left me with. In fact, it was so bad that all 4 of us in the competition called it quits. Not one of us interested in using Facebook at all after that. What started as a friendly game turned into a life-or-death situation. Social media in a nutshell. Well, my friends, we made it out of the Nocturnity Zone in one piece once again, but just barely. I hope you enjoyed the ride. If so, hit that like button, and if you'd be so kind, the share button too. We have many more broadcasts on the way, so if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Now is the time. And if you haven't had your fill, our channel's video section is full of grade A stories that'll keep you as terrified as they do entertained. Stories you'll get nowhere else, narrated by yours truly. Hit the playlist section and they'll all play one by one, giving you hours upon hours in Nocturnity, if, that is, you're brave enough to do it. Either way, our newest video is already in the works, and I look forward to seeing you when it drops. Until then, my friends, stay safe.